Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem. Approaching the Mount of Olives, he sends 2 disciples to get a colt for him.
Go into the village ahead of you. You will find a colt there at the entrance. When you see it, untie it and bring it to me. If anyone asks why you're untying the colt, tell them the Lord needs it.
So the disciples departed and found the colt just as he said that they would. As they were untying it, the owners asked, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they were told, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on it, and set Jesus upon it. As he rode along, people spread their cloaks on the ground. When he came near the place where the road goes down to the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully praising God for all the miracles they had seen.
Hosanna! Hosanna!
Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory be with him.
Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop."
If these were silent, the stones themselves would shout out.
Jesus enters the temple and begins to drive out those who are selling things. They are overturning the tables.
It is written, "My house shall be a house of prayer," but all of you turned it into a den of robbers.
Judas agrees to betray Jesus.
Yes, Judas.
What will you give me if I betray Jesus to you?
They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus.
Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me.
Not our Lord. Surely
Surely not my Lord.
One of you who has eaten from this table will betray me. For my way has been determined by God, but woe to the man who betrays me. For surely I tell you, he will wish that he had never been born.
Surely not I, Rabbi.
Why do you ask me that question, Jesus? Take and eat this bread, for it is my body. And this cup is my blood poured out for you. Of sin. For I will never partake of the fruit of wine again until I have in my Father's kingdom.
He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him.
Pray so that you do not come to the time of trial.
Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed.
Dear Lord, remove this cup from me, so that not my will but yours be done.
An angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief.
What are you all doing? You sleeping? Get up and pray, so that you may not come to the time of trial.
After Jesus was questioned by Annas and Caiaphas, he was taken by the high priests to Pilate. Pilate began to question the priests.
What charges do you bring before this man?
He has been undermining our law, he has been avoiding his taxes, and he has been calling himself the Messiah.
That is none of my concern. If he has wronged you, take him and judge him by your laws.
But we are not permitted to kill anyone.
Pilate gave in and summoned Jesus to follow.
Are you the king of the Jews?
Are you asking this of me? Or is
Do
this
I-
what others are saying about me?
Do I look like a Jew? Your people and your high priests turned you over to me. What did you do?
My kingdom is not made up of things that you can see. If it was, my people would be fighting to keep me from being turned over.
So, are you a king or not?
You tell me. I was born a king. Everyone who cares about the truth cares for me.
But what is truth?
By this time, a crowd had gathered at Pilate's headquarters. Having found nothing wrong with Jesus, he gave it up with a plan to try and get around the high priests.
I find nothing wrong with this man, but there is a custom that I pardon one prisoner at Passover. Do you want me to pardon Jesus?
But the high priests had anticipated this. They had worked up a crowd to call for the release of a different prisoner.
No, not Jesus. Pardon Barabbas. Pardon Barabbas.
So be it. But let it be known that I find him guilty of no crime.
But you must crucify him and make an example of him.
But I have found nothing wrong with him.
He claims to be the Son of God. He spews blasphemy. By our law, he must die.
When Pilate heard this, he became more fearful. He went back into his headquarters to further question Jesus.
Who are you? Where did you come from? Why won't you talk? Don't you know that I have the power to save your life?
You have no such power. The only power you have is that granted from heaven.
Pilate did his best to pardon Jesus, but the high priest wouldn't budge.
He has done nothing wrong.
He sets himself up as a king, and anyone who sets him up as a king defies Caesar. Are you willing to support a man who defies Caesar?
When Pilate heard these words, he led Jesus out before them.
Here is your king.
Kill him. Crucify him.
Kill
Let
him!
him kill.
You want me to kill him? You want me to crucify your king?
We have no king but Caesar.
Pilate finally caved in to their demands, and he handed Jesus over to be crucified.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
As they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A great number of people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breast that never nursed. Then they began to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For they do this when the wood is green. What will happen when it is dry? 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by, watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him that said, this is the king of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged were kept deriding him and saying, are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He replied, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about noon, and the darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, when the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. When Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last breath. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, certainly this man was innocent. And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when he rose up from the grave? Were you there when he rose up from the grave? Were you there when he rose up from the grave? Oh, sometimes I feel like shouting, glory, glory, glory. Were you there when he